President Trump will deliver his highly anticipated State of the Union address tomorrow night. The White House says he's expected to tout the theme of building a safe, strong, and proud America. Senior administration officials are also trying to push the idea that the speech will be unifying.
To discuss it all now, let's bring in Jason Rosenbaum. He's a political reporter for the St. Louis, Missouri Public Radio. Thanks a lot for joining us, Jason. Can you explain to us why this specific Senate race in Missouri is so significant when it comes to the midterm elections?
Well, if Democrats nationally want any chance of taking back the Senate, they have to make sure that McCaskill stays in office. And it's a tough thing for them to do because Missouri has gone much more Republican since McCaskill was first elected in 2006. Donald Trump won the state by nearly 19 percentage points. Some of the previously Democratic suburbs and rural areas have gone very Republican in the last 2 or 3 election cycles. And while you would never count McCaskill out because she is an unbelievable retail politician, the demographics of the state make this probably her most challenging Senate race to date.
You recently wrote an article about Senator McCaskill's first town hall in St. Louis. Highlight for us some of the biggest issues voters were concerned about when she addressed them.
Clearly the biggest issue when she had her first town hall in St. Louis, which is a Democratic stronghold, is the DACA legislation. Senator McCaskill was one of the few Democrats to vote against the shutdown, and essentially she voted for a bill to keep the government open. And that upset a lot of people that wanted the DACA issue to be leveraged. Ultimately, the shutdown was resolved, and she basically hammered home that she was optimistic that DACA legislation would be able to go forward. But the other big issue, especially in St. Louis, is the relationship between the African-American community and police. Not only did we have Ferguson in 2014, which was a big flashpoint on that issue, but recently we had weeks of protests when a judge acquitted a white police officer of shooting an African-American last year. So since the senator needs such a large turnout out of St. Louis and Kansas City in order for re-election to be a possibility, she has to make sure that she connects with an African-American community here that's been upset with the local Democratic Party here. It was a pretty cordial meeting, and she did address some of those issues head on. And I think even though this was an official event, not a political event, that was her way of trying to make sure that she's in touch with the base she desperately needs this year.
All right, so put your odds maker's cap on here. I know you're not a professional odds maker, but what are the chances that McCaskill can be unseated?
It's pretty good, but as I said on the outset, she is probably one of the best retail politicians of either party. She spent a lot of time last year doing town halls in rural parts of the state where Trump won by a large margin. The only way I see her winning is if 3 things happen. First, she needs a big turnout out of the state's urban areas in St. Louis, Kansas City, and Columbia. She needs to either compete or win in the suburbs in both St. Louis and Kansas City, which have gotten increasingly Republican over the last couple of election cycles. And then she needs to at least get 30 or 40% of the vote in rural Missouri, which ended up voting for Trump by upwards of 70% in 2016. It's not an easy path for her to take, and many people believe that the Attorney General Josh Hawley, who is the front runner, is a very strong candidate. No one is comparing him to Todd Akin this time around. But if she's able to do those 3 things, and especially if the approval ratings for the president aren't very good, she can pull out re-election as she did in 2006. People are looking at her 2006 election versus Jim Talent as kind of a template for her to win in a state that is difficult for the Democrats.
And Jason, finally, as we look ahead to the President's State of the Union speech, what are some of the top issues people in Missouri want to hear about? What are they most concerned about going forward?
The economy is absolutely the most important issue. Whether you go to urban or rural Missouri, people here want the president to actually deliver on his words of bringing back economic vitality to some of the nation's cities and rural areas. That's probably why rural Missouri ended up voting for a New York developer billionaire back in 2016, because he promised jobs and he promised economic vitality. So I think that's the main thing that people here want him to speak of, and they actually want him to deliver, because if he doesn't end up delivering by 2019, 2020, we could see a situation where the Republican turn that happened in 2016 goes a little bit back toward the Democrats. This is a historically close state, and I think that's what people in Missouri want to see, actual promises fulfilled.
All right, Jason Rosenbaum, thank you so much. Really interesting stuff. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.